It's morning time, so that's coffee. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I'm just kind of drinking a little bit. So welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my video. As you guys do know, we do have the Grand Chess Tour Croatia, and I have the game Jan Nepomniachtchi versus Shakriyar Mamedyarov. Unfortunately, we don't have Wesley So playing in the tournament, and as of now, we don't have Gary Kasparov playing as well. He might do a Vladimir Kramnik and come in during the Blitz portion, so we'll have to see about that. But he is listed in the pictures for the event. So, for all of my people that are coming from the Philippines, as always, I'll say Mabuhay, Kumusta na, Masaya, Kong Makita Kang Muli. Appreciate you guys very much. Aking Makai Bigan. Appreciate it very much, guys. Anybody who is coming from Russia, I will say Privyet, Kakadela, and Spasibo for coming by and taking a look at my video. For anybody coming from Azerbaijan, I will say Salam and Chak Sagol. Appreciate you guys very much. And anybody who might be coming from Croatia, I will say Zadravo, Kako Si Moje Prijatelja. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. I think that's when I've spoken a lot of languages. I mean, I covered 4 different ones right now. I always, whenever they have a tournament in a certain area, I like to try to address, the audience that might be watching from that particular portion, area of the world. So, French or, Croatian or whatever the situation may be. So that was what was the last part. But anyway, if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got C4, knight to F6, G3. We got G6, bishop to G2, bishop to G7, knight to C3, castles, D4, D6, and we have E4. So what we have on the board is called the King's Indian Defense, and it is the Deferred Fianchetto variation. This looks very familiar to me. I'm a D4, like going D4, C4 against, the King's Indian as black. So this is very familiar to me, like this type of pawn center. I'm not a Fianchetto kind of person. I usually just kind of go bishop b2, bishop b3 type situations. But at some point you might be able to open this bishop up on this diagonal. So, white and black have just kind of similar ideas here. So we do see e5 by black, and we have knight g to e2. It's also possible, something else that's common in these positions is actually going d5. A major situation is you are depriving black of the ideal square for their knight, so they will probably have to do something like knight b to d7. You would see c6 trying to break that down, h3, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, and as you guys can see, this square is still taken away from the the knight. So I mean, the knight will probably go to knight to a6 and maybe knight to c5 or even knight b to d7 to c5, just trying to add pressure to this pawn here. Going back to what we saw in the game, knight g to e2, we see pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. We see rook to e8, and we already have it, we already have that e4 point, very well covered, so we just go ahead and castle. We see knight b to d7, like I was saying before. We see h3. H3 is always very useful because a lot of the times this knight tries to hop in there, and so does the bishop. So it can get a little annoying. So we do see a6, rook comes to e1. We see rook over to b8. We got bishop to e3. We see knight to e5. And we see b3. And as you guys can see, I mean, black is not like losing by any means. But as you can see, white just has a really, really comfortable position. They have that loop for their king. They have all of their pieces developed. The queen will be able to swing out at some point, and all of their points are just really well covered. And they do have this nice clamp on this d5 square. So, black is just playing a little bit more of a cramped position than white is. But like I said, it's not the end of the world. It's not like white is just like, gonna mow black over. So we see c5, trying to knock that knight away from its knight square. We see knight down to e2. We see b5. We see f4, knight e comes to d7, and then we do see queen taking d6. And as white, we've just snapped the pawn off. And it gets more interesting after this. So we see b4, and we don't see a knight moved. We actually see e5. And we are not getting close to the novelty yet. So, this has all been played before. So we do see pawn takes c3. We see knight takes c3. So at this point, white is playing down a piece. Now, what I can definitely say about the position is, like I said, every single piece for white is working. You know, we do kind of have a little bit of congestion over here, you know, for black's pieces. You know, you do have 2 pawns for the piece. So you have almost full compensation. But as far as the computer is concerned, you know, white is actually doing slightly better in this position because of the stuff I mentioned. So we see knight over to h5, trying to see if we can tickle this pawn here, but we do see g4. We get bishop to f8 just in time to knock that queen away. The queen comes down to d2. We see a fianchetto of the knight to g7. So as you guys can see, you know, black's position is just much worse than it was before because all of these pieces are not on squares that you really want them to be on. So yes, white is playing down the piece, but when you kind of compare it to like the way that black's pieces are, you know, it's actually, you can see why the computer's like, hey man, you know, you're doing well because, you know, white just is. So we see knight to d5 and, you know, we're eyeing this square here. You know, we can be swinging the rook over here. So, you know, everything is just like working for white. You know, so we see f6, and this is kind of like a critical point in the game because as you can see, you know, not only is black very underdeveloped, they pretty much backed all their pieces back up. You know, now they've just opened up lines to their king. So, you know, black has weakened their position just a little bit. So we see rook a to d1. And like I said, every single white piece is playing. It's in the game. We see pawn takes e5, and then we actually see f5. Not even taking that pawn back. You know, we're intent on ripping this position open. I'm basically just trying to make this king that's just very like vulnerable. So we see bishop to b7, and this is actually the novelty of the game. Bishop to e7 has been seen in this position before, just trying to like discourage this move here, you know, being able to kind of creep into this position. We do see bishop to b7. We see bishop to g5, which is getting a tempo on the queen. And then we see queen over to c8. We see rook to f1. We're planning on taking back with the pawn and having some support. So the pawn takes on f5, pawn takes f5, and then we see king over to f8. So the king's trying to get, you know, trying to get into some type of safety, right? But we do see f6. Knight comes to e6, and then we see f7. As you guys can see, I mean, like I said before, you know, black is just in a very defensive position. Their pieces are getting pushed around. It's crazy because, you know, white is like down an entire piece here. But, you know, they're just able to just push black around on the board right now. So we do see rook over to d8. And before we get into what was actually played in the game, I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video and see if you can spot the actual best move for white in this position. Go ahead and do so. All right, cool. So, what we actually saw in the game, which was actually, I mean, it was a legitimate move. It just wasn't like the crazy strongest move. We actually saw knight to b6 in the game, but the very killer move is actually knight to e7. You absolutely do not want to capture this because you're going to be looking at bishop takes e7. And then, you know, where do you put your rook? You know, your rook is basically going to be gone, like no matter where you put it. And you definitely have some problems coming up. So after knight to e7, it's actually advisable to go queen to c7. And one of the major reasons why white is so much better in these positions right here is because of the limited movability that black's pieces has. So when you attack black's piece, like, you know, it only has like a square or two to go to in a lot of cases. So it becomes very easy to calculate. You know, some of these moves aren't the best, you know, case scenario moves. So, you know, your position could just get worse. So queen comes to c7, and then we would see knight to f5. And you have the same problem that you had before. You know, this rook doesn't really have anywhere good to go. You definitely can't move it because you're going to be dropping your knight and you're going to be getting your piece back, you know, plus you're going to be up a pawn. So that's not nice. So like I said, we did see knight to b6. We see knight takes b6, bishop to f6 first, making bishop come to g7, and then queen taking d8 with check, queen taking d8, bishop taking d8, bishop taking g2, king taking g2. We see knight back to f8. We see bishop to e7. And this is placing a nice little double attack on this knight plus this pawn. So we do see knight back to knight b to d7. We see rook to d6, e4, rook swings to e1. We've kind of gotten our bishop, you know, a little bit more active, you know, giving our king a little bit of room to breathe. So we do see rook takes e4. We see king to g7. We see rook takes a6, king takes f7. Bishop down to d6, attacking the rook in the corner. or, you know, kind of in the corner. Rook comes to c8, and then we do see rook to e7 with check. You know, just giving, you know, a nice little check, moving the king a little bit somewhere. But instead of that, we actually have a really nice way to create a passed pawn, and that is actually b4. You absolutely cannot take because you're going to be dropping your bishop. So it's a nice kind of free move that you have to try to get your pawn passed. And then after we see knight to f6, trying to counterattack this rook. Rook comes to e7 with check. We see king to g6, and then we see b5. You know, we've gotten our pawn passed. So yeah, we are still down a piece, but we do have both rooks. And we do have some very dangerous pawns here on the queen side. So that's actually doing really, really well. So we see rook up to e7, like I said, king up to g8. We see rook to a7. So, you know, we're getting these pieces on, you know, the 7th rank, which is ideal. So the knight comes to f6. We see rook to g7 with check. King comes to h8. We see rook g to b7. We see knight down to e4. We see rook to b8. We really want to get this rook off the board because this is going to like be that much better for white. So the knight takes d6, rook takes c8. We see knight takes c8, and then we see rook to a8. You know, attacking both of these knights. So you're choosing to save one. So the rook comes down to d6. Rook takes f8 with check. King to g7. Rook to a8. We see bishop down to c3. We see a4. And then we make the only move that seems like it protects you know, the pawn from advancing, but unfortunately it loses because after knight comes to b7, we see rook to a7. And the most important thing about making this move is to not get pinned. But as you can see, this knight is pinned to this king. So you're going to be losing your knight for nothing. And you are just two entire pawns down and an exchange down. And so it is in this position that Mamedyarov does resign the game, and Jan Nepomniachtchi gets his win. You know, I think as of now, Jan, I think he's in the lead, or he's in second or something like that. Like he's in the top. So, you know, he's definitely showing that, you know, he's ready to play the World Championships later on. So, but I appreciate you guys coming by very much. Salamat, spasibo. I don't know how to say thank you in Croatian. I will learn it. And chak sago to all of my other people. And I'll see you guys next time.